Hi everyone, welcome to the second video in the series, Finding Your First Job as a Physical Therapist. Today I'm mainly going to be talking about the interview. If you missed my first video, go check it out. It's in the playlist labeled Finding Your First Job as a Physical Therapist. So let's go ahead and get started with the interview process. When you're doing or preparing for an interview, I want you to keep in mind that you want to know them before they know you. What I mean by that is you need to go and do some research. Go check out their website, see what their mission statement is, have it in your head, write it down, see what they specialize in, see what kind of patients they typically treat based on the website content. Look up pictures of the people who work there, especially if you're doing email correspondence at this point with maybe your future supervisor or your boss. It's good to have a face to a name as you go into the interview. Also, how many physical therapists work there? How old is the clinic or the hospital that you're applying for? All those are good things to have in mind so that you can go into the interview knowing a good bit about the clinic so that they see that you really did look into who they were and what their vision was as a company. Not only are they interviewing you, you're interviewing them. Come up with your questions. So that leads into my second tip for you. Questions for them. You need to be prepared for that. Honestly, for me, as a new physical therapist, and just based on advice I had gotten from CIs and even just something I had learned as a student doing different orthopedic internships, was that I realized how many patients you had in a day made a big difference on how you were going to feel a few months into this job. So I put a cap on the number of patients that I knew I wanted to see in a day. For me, in an 8-hour day, I didn't want to be seeing much more than 12 patients a day. I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, if you go into a job and you're seeing like 20 patients in an 8-hour day, you're going to be setting yourself up for burnout real quick. You might feel like you can handle it, and hey, look at your coworkers, they seem to be doing it too. But it's a really good way to not be giving the best quality treatment to your patients. A really good way to just be downright exhausted by the end of the day. I don't go in telling them that right off the bat. Simply just ask them the question. How many patients in a typical day am I going to be seeing? And how much time do I typically get with each patient? Another question I was interested in asking was, what kind of mentorship am I going to have? Is there time set aside each week, each month to have a chance to go over techniques or ask questions? Or is it kind of an ongoing mentorship where your supervisor or your boss is quite available for you to ask questions and to take some time aside to show you a technique real quick or to give you a tip on a few exercises? I'm sure there's a lot of opinions out there about which is better. Mine was kind of more ongoing mentorship, and quite frankly, it actually has worked out really well. I think it's really important that your supervisor or whoever you're under, whoever you're working with, is available for you to ask questions to every now and then, and that they're going to be willing to take a little bit of time aside to talk with you or to give you some tips about challenging patients. I also think it's important to ask them what their mission is and what their goals are for their company. Like, how are they growing? That shows that you care about the growth, and it's also helpful for you to see what they're interested in. You never know what you can offer them in that growth as a company. These are just a few questions I wanted to give you to start off with. There's literally a million other questions that you could ask them, but this is just a starting point, and I hope that's helpful. Let's go ahead and get into the next tip. Just like there are a lot of questions that you could ask your potential future employer, there's a lot of questions that they could ask you. There's no way I'm going to be able to cover all of those options on this one video, but I'm at least going to give you just a starting point of things you could be thinking of before you go into the interview that I think it's important to reflect on before you ask the question. I come to find this is a pretty common question that an employer is going to ask you as a future physical therapist of their company. They're going to ask you, what was your toughest patient experience and how did you handle it? Now, for you, you're just starting out, but you had internships. Think back, what were some tough patients that you had? Maybe a mean patient, maybe a very fearful patient, maybe it was a doubtful patient. How did you handle those different situations? I kind of doubt that you went through your internships without having at least one fairly difficult patient to work with. Another question they may likely ask you is, what was your toughest experience with a coworker and how did you handle that? Now this might be a little tough. Maybe as a student you didn't have too much difficulty with the people you were working with or around, but reflect on it. Was anyone demeaning or belittling, or was there anyone you were working alongside of that just was not a good team player? If you're having a really hard time coming up with something just from your student internships, it's totally okay at this point to look back, before PT school even, with other jobs and difficult circumstances you had with coworkers. They're going to understand that it's your first year working as a physical therapist and that you might not have an example to give that's specifically PT related, but try as best you can to make it related to the profession. Another question they may ask you is going to be related to any weaknesses you feel like you have as a clinician. Now, let's be honest, you're a first year physical therapist. There's plenty of weaknesses that you have at this point, and that's okay. And I want you to be honest about some of those weaknesses. Don't feel like you have to portray this perfect version of yourself. There's no such thing. Even experienced physical therapists have things that they still need to work on. I want you to think about not just typical things like, you're still getting used to documentation, or maybe you still want to improve on performing that initial evaluation. Not that those are bad things to say, but I feel like a lot of employers hear that a lot. So I wanted to give you some tips of maybe some more unique things to point out if they're relevant to you in terms of weaknesses that you're wanting to improve on. One thing that, whether you realize it or not, is that you want to be able to improve getting a patient to trust you on day one. Not just trust you, but trust the profession of physical therapy. I think that could be a really important thing to bring up to your employer, that's an area that you're really trying to improve on. Not just that, think about maybe past CIs you had that had really unique ways of explaining diagnosis to different patients. That's an area I feel like a lot of new PTs struggle in that first year. I know I'm still learning more and more tips of unique ways to explain injuries or treatments to patients, and I think that is also something that might stand out a little bit more in your interview when you're getting that first job. Or maybe you could mention that when a patient hates exercising, sometimes you find it difficult to get them to really buy into physical therapy and to do their best and give their best in physical therapy and promoting healing for their body. After saying some of those things, it could be a big plus to mention to your future employer that you'd really love if they could help you grow in these areas to improve yourself as a physical therapist. That shows them that you know what some weaknesses are that you have and that you're really hoping they can help you grow in these areas. This kind of ties into questions that are typically asked about your strengths. So, what are your strengths as a physical therapist? What are the areas you're really good at? And I want you all to be honest. Don't sit there all bashful, you don't have anything to say. Take time to think about it. What were things that CIs complimented you on during internships? Maybe you're really patient with difficult patients. Maybe you have a niche in doing gait training and you got a lot of compliments on that as a student. Don't hold back. Try and think about things that you really are good at. Don't just say, well, I'm a hard worker, or I'm really compassionate. I mean, not that those are bad or even untruthful, but give them something that really is true about yourself that will stand out a little bit. Because ultimately, telling them what your strengths are is going to lead into this next tip I want to give you. You want to show your employer that you could be an asset to their company. What can you offer them as they are trying to grow? Maybe even though it's more of an orthopedic clinic, you had some experience on the neuro side of things and you're really passionate about it and you're hoping that's something that you can contribute to the company and to the clinic in terms of bringing in new patient populations. That's something I even offered during my interview. Maybe it's something else. Maybe you're really passionate about dry needling and you're planning on getting certified, and maybe that's something that the company doesn't even have or offer yet to their patients. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's aquatic therapy. There's countless things that you could probably offer to the clinic that you don't even know. So dig into those things you're passionate about, things you realize, man, I kind of want to grow in this area, but the clinic doesn't have it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe that's something you can bring to the table to offer this clinic to show them, hey, you know, like I'm an asset. I can help you grow. And that's a big deal. And now just to end the video, I want to just give you some practical advice. Be polite, be kind, and be confident. You're a newbie. Everyone knows it. They know it. You don't have to pretend like you're going to go in there and save the world, but be confident in the way that you talk. Be confident in the way you talk about your weaknesses, the way you talk about your strengths. Show them that you are capable of being a professional and being an adult and going in there and doing your best and showing the patients that you're a professional as well. It's going to go a long way to show all those qualities about yourself. Stay tuned for my next video, which is going to be talking about or giving advice on how do you pick between this job you were offered and this job that you were offered. You might have a few options on the table. What's the best one for you? I'm going to talk about that next.